It's going really well for John Paulson.
Paulson made a personal profit of more than $5 billion last year, and that is probably the biggest one-year personal gain in investment history.
John Paulson, known as JP, the foreclosure king.
One guy gets $5 billion in 1 year. He must have gotten it from Santa Claus.
Yeah, pay attention, Palast. In 2008, when the mortgage market was heading over a cliff, JP gave it an extra kick in the ass. Because every time a mortgage in America went kablooey, JP made another buck. Altogether, he made $5 billion. More money than any human since the pharaohs. Here's how he did it. In 2007, JP cut a deal with the bankers at Goldman Sachs. Goldman had lined up some schmucks, big European banks, and pension funds. Goldman told the schmucks that they and JP together would buy billions of dollars of something called CDOs, which stands for Synthetic Collateralized Debt Obligation Derivatives. If you don't know what a synthetic collateralized debt obligation derivative CDO is, you're not a billionaire. Think of these derivatives as a kind of insurance on home mortgages. If the mortgage goes bad and someone loses their home to foreclosure, the insurers must pay. What Goldman didn't tell the schmucks providing insurance is that JP was secretly betting against these very mortgages. JP was the secret beneficiary of the insurance policies. JP was the one who would collect the insurance if the mortgages went to hell. It's kind of like an arsonist buying fire insurance on buildings he's sure will burn down. JP even helped pick out the mortgages that the schmucks would insure. He deliberately chose the shittiest subprime mortgages with horrible interest rates, like the one sinking the Pratt family. These stinking bags of mortgages were packaged into securities, those collateralized debt obligations. Within a year, the stinking bags of mortgage securities went down the toilet, losing 99% of their value as homeowners went bankrupt. The schmucks paid out billions, collected by JP. Mortgage market imploded, and foreclosures exploded. And JP, lots of folks assumed he'd go to prison. No. The politically connected JP kept the whole $5 billion. He's not in jail. He's living large. Welcome to the lifestyles of the rich and shameless.
This is Greg Palast, the author of the new book, How Trump Stole 2020, out on June 2nd. And what you just saw was a clip from The Best Democracy Money Can Buy about the billionaires that put Donald Trump into office. That was John Paulson, the guy who crashed the mortgage market in 2008 and made $5 billion personally, more than even the pharaohs have ever made. No other human beings made that much money, but that wasn't enough. So he became the #1 political advisor, economic advisor to Donald Trump, and his partner, Steve Mnuchin, he's not in jail. He's Secretary of the Treasury, deciding what to do with our trillions in easy squeezy that have just been put out. And I can't be more honored than to have with us now, live, David Cay Johnston, the Pulitzer Prize winning author of the amazing best-selling book. And I say that I'm one of the few people one of the few interviewers who actually read the book, and twice. It's even worse than you think what the Trump administration is doing to America. He's the founder and editor of DCReport.org. DCReport.org. What an honor. David Cay Johnston is going to tell us about the billionaires who are making more billions from Donald Trump's misadministration. David Cay Johnston, glad you're with us now.
Well, thank you for having me back again with you, Greg.
So what's your beef? You got some billionaires advising Trump. I know that Steven Schwartzman just had a private meeting with Trump telling him when I guess I should call him Dr. Schwartzman, because he's telling Trump when to lift the the restrictions on movement and social distancing. I didn't know he had a medical degree, but I guess if you have several billion, that's enough. And other billionaires. So tell us what's so bad about having billionaires decide who lives, who dies, and when.
Yeah, I think there's a reason we have medical professionals and public health experts whose business this is, not people who value themselves based on whether they have 2 or 3 commas after their net worth statement. I've observed among the many very wealthy people I've known that those who earned their money in the marketplace and made it in prosaic businesses where they hired ordinary Americans are generally pretty good folks.
You mean that the people who kind of make stuff as opposed to manipulate markets? Right. Okay.
But those who made it in the marketplace, who work in finance, who got it from government subsidies, which I've written books about,
yes,
bestsellers about, they're not that way at all. And I always try to keep in mind the profile of Sherry Lansing, who was the first woman to head a major Hollywood studio done by my colleague Geraldine Fabricant when I was at the New York Times. It's about 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And it was about how Ms. Lansing, who at the time had to be worth at least $100 million, I mean, absolute minimum, said that she had nightmares about becoming a bag lady, pushing a grocery cart down the street. That is a sick relationship with money. And the billionaires in this country who made their money off the taxpayers, off of hidden subsidies, off of not paying their taxes, off of finance, and especially financial manipulations of the rules, those people have a pathological relationship to money, and it's not unlike the relationship the coronavirus has to human beings. It does bad things and not a single good thing.
But what do we care? So some billionaire has a sick relationship. They just want another billionaire. They can't sleep. So what do we care? Why does it affect? What does it matter? Donald Trump's president and his buddies are, as he says, not losers. He says, "What do you want me to put in my cabinet? Losers? No, you need billionaires or the billionaires' buck buddies in office." So what's the problem now? We have this government. We have a billionaire. We should be grateful. Like he says, he's successful. You want a loser?
Well, the problem with that is that we end up with policies that further enrich the already rich, which is a terrible measure. You know, the measure of people's lives should be character and wisdom and integrity, not wealth. Or in the case of Donald Trump, who's no billionaire, I was the one to first expose in 1990 that he was a fraud and didn't have any money like that at all. In fact, he had a negative net worth of about $300 million back then.
I have to say, yes.
So you're money, but because they have access to the president, because they get their buddies appointed to government positions, we end up with a government that works against ordinary people. Right now, the National Labor Relations Board cannot act because it doesn't have a quorum, because Trump won't appoint people. So there's no quorum. So you have workers all across America who've tried to organize unions who've been fired. It's illegal to fire them. They can't have their cases heard because the board isn't there. The Federal Elections Commission is supposed to deal with improper campaign financing, illegal money going to campaigns like, I don't know, Russian money, for example. And guess what? They don't have a quorum. And in other cases, the rules are being rewritten so that who is winning? Companies that pollute, companies that don't clean up their toxic messes, companies that are creating unsafe conditions. That's the problem with it, is you need to have a balance in your government. And we don't have a balance at all. What we have is a government right now of, by, and for the worst segments in our society. Billionaires who made their money through manipulation of the financial markets and subsidies. Racists. We have a minister of hate in this administration.
Who would that be?
In the White House. Stephen Miller. We cage children. We are not pursuing all sorts of criminal activity. And of course, as we see the death count rising, we have a president who told us when we had 15 coronavirus cases that soon they would all go away.
All you have to do is show up to work. And yes, and it will just magically, I think his term was, it disappears magically. So he's a magician too. But, you know, let me ask you a question. You talked about the billionaire. in the cabinet and the demi-billionaires like Steve Mnuchin, the partner of John Paulson, who crashed the mortgage market in 2008, and they were involved in the takeover of One West Corporation. Tell us about this guy who has come up with, after all, come on, he's been quite generous, Steve Mnuchin and Mr. Trump. Well, I'm nonpartisan, so I shouldn't use his name. Let's call him Agent Orange. So tell us about Steve Mnuchin. I know you've done quite a bit of investigating, and about our Secretary of Treasury, the guy who's handing out the $2 trillion to we viral Americans.
Steve Mnuchin is part of a story that keeps happening since Reagan and since we stopped regulating banks and financial institutions. And remember, from the end of the Depression in the 30s up until about 1985, we didn't have big bank failures of any consequence. And what Mnuchin did was, for a song, he got a hold of a failing Pasadena, California savings and loan, or maybe it may have actually been a bank, indie bank. And it had a portfolio of loans. And by manipulating the closing of these loans on people, many of whom qualified for quality 30-year conventional mortgages, but were put into crummy mortgages with terrible features in them.
Yeah, like subprimes, huge boosts in interest rates, right, etc.
Right. And about a fifth of these loans in the whole country were issued by one bank countrywide in Thousand Oaks, which is about an hour outside Los Angeles, where they literally were, they have what they call arts and crafts rooms, and they just made up financial statements to show people qualified. 1 in 3 real estate appraisers in America, about 11,000 real estate appraisers, signed a petition to the federal government early in the century saying, we are not getting business because we won't inflate the values of properties. And Mnuchin took advantage of this situation. It used to be, when I first got a loan as a young man on a home, I put 20% down, and the only security the bank had was my house. That meant the bank had a tremendous interest in making sure the house was worth what they were loaning me against.
Right.
Well, the Bush administration essentially stopped these rules, what are called underwriting. And so if you wrote a note and gave someone $1 million for a house that was worth $200,000, the surface result would be, well, a banker wouldn't do that because they wouldn't get the money back. No, we set up a system where you then sold the note. The note was put into a package with hundreds of thousands of other notes. They were divvied up between pension funds and hedge funds and other investors. And significantly, if you got in trouble with your mortgage, you lost your job, for example, or you got in an automobile accident and had big medical bills. Under the old system, you could go to your banker and say, I need a forbearance. I need some help. I got to do something to fix this mortgage. Under the new system, they would say, I'm sorry, well, you get a bill from us every month. We don't own that mortgage, and we've sold it, and we're not allowed to reach in and get your mortgage and pull it out so that we can give you a forbearance, to give you some relief. We would have to undo the whole package. You're stuck. We still have that system.
And we lost, and how many people lost their homes because of that system?
Not only did enormous numbers of people lose their homes, and some of them over highly technical matters, being off, in one case, I think 27 cents in the payment they sent in being short. But if you're someone listening to this who has paid off, or someone around you has paid off their mortgage, do what I just did yesterday. I went to look up the notice at the courthouse online that I paid off the mortgage on my home. Being an old guy, I paid off my mortgage.
Right.
The Wells Fargo Bank never filed the paperwork. And so even though I paid my mortgage years ago, it shows that I still owe a mortgage. Go check, folks. I mean, this is going to blow up on people. And Mnuchin was the guy who, remember, not only did he go in, Greg, and profit off this, this is the guy whose wife played Marie, Let Them Eat Cake, Antoinette, in the only big movie role she had. And he just said, and I'm slightly condensing his words, hey, you're getting $1,200. Americans should be able to live for 10 weeks on $1,200. This is a guy who can't live on $1,200 for lunch.
Okay, so Mnuchin himself actually cashed in big time. Every time someone was foreclosed on, Mnuchin actually picked up a fee from the government for foreclosing on homes, in addition, so his partner John Paulson, who made $5 billion in the crash of the market and helped push it over a cliff, by the way. And Mnuchin made a couple $100 million. Now he's our Secretary of Treasury, and like you say, he says $1,200 is enough. Now he's also, and by the way, I'm speaking right now with David Cay Johnston, the Pulitzer Prize-winning author of the best-selling book, It's Even Worse Than You Think, What the Trump Administration is Doing to America. He is the founder and editor-in-chief of DCReport.org. Great site. You get insights that you just don't get anywhere in the mainstream media. It's the real thing. Please go to DCReport.org. This is Greg Palast. I am, you may know me as the author of The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, and the film, which you just saw a clip of The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, my new book out, How Trump Stole 2020. See, David, I figured I would write it in advance. It's kind of like your last warning. You can hear the sirens out there because they don't like the title of that book. So, you know, I've always been writing books.
You're wrong, too.
Well, here's the thing, is I've been writing books about theft of the election. In 2000, I wrote Best Democracy Money Can Buy about after, basically, George Bush stole the election by removing black people from the voter rolls of Florida. In 2004, about the theft of the election, I wrote a book, Our Madhouse, about the theft of the election in Ohio and elsewhere, again, through racial vote thieving techniques. We call it vote suppression, but you know, David, when someone steals your car, you don't say your car's been suppressed, you say it's been stolen. So I'm thrilled to speak with you because I want to emphasize to people, they don't steal votes to steal elections. They steal votes to steal the money. And no one knows more about this than David Cay Johnston because, first of all, he busted Donald Trump on his number one claim to fame, that he's a billionaire. He's a nega millionaire. He when he came into office, he was already deep in the hole, but he seems to be filling that hole while he's in office. Can you talk to me about that?
Well, I have no doubt that Donald has profited mightily from this. I mean, as taxpayers, we spent a fortune. When he goes to play golf, and the Secret Service, rents golf carts for his security. I don't have any problem with the issue of security. Whatever security we need to provide the president, we should provide that. But not to the president's own companies where he charges the highest retail price he can. And Donald's a grifter. He's a con artist. He's the third generation head of a white-collar crime family that's now 4 generations. And so we sort of shouldn't be surprised by that. And, when any policy is put in place, whether it's the mortgage policies we talked about earlier, whether it's various other things Trump's doing now with voting, there are always about 14 different ways to rip off the public. And let me give you what I think is one of the best examples. We just had a piece. I didn't write it. I edited it at DC Report. Imagine you went out and bought some corporate bonds last year, for your retirement account. So Ford Motor Company bonds. And Ford's never filed bankruptcy, solid company, makes a profit. And then the coronavirus comes along, and your Ford bonds are worth a lot less. So you bought a $1,000 bond, and maybe now it's worth $700. Well, the Federal Reserve will buy your bond back for $1,000. Oh, I'm sorry. They won't buy your bond back, Greg, because you're just an ordinary bloke. But if you were the Palast hedge fund, if you were the Palast bank, the Palast insurance company, the Fed will be happy to give you nice new greenbacks at 100 cents on the dollar for your dirty old bond that isn't worth it. And a huge amount of money is being transferred this way. We call it not money laundering, but money washing. And who knows about this? Hardly anybody. And when we ran our piece, by the way, some people on Twitter said, well, too hard to understand. And I said, you didn't read the piece. We wrote it so that anybody who went to high school can understand its meaning. And they are doing everything they can in this administration to pick your pocket, to put rules that take away your right to protect yourself. If you're wrong, to get redress in the courts. They're appointing judges who are unqualified, rated by the American Bar Association as unqualified. They've tried to put people in positions of being judges on appeals courts who've never tried a case and don't even understand the procedure of courtroom law. Most lawyers, remember, don't practice in a courtroom. They practice in an office with an ink pen. And that's the characteristic people need to understand. And you're quite right. Voter suppression is probably the wrong term. it's stealing the election by preventing you from voting. We should take some heart, however, that in Wisconsin, where they only had 5 instead of 180 voting places in Milwaukee, people turned out to vote, and these 2 awful right-wing judges who were removed could only be removed because people who were not in Milwaukee, which is a mostly minority city, but in the white dairy country and manufacturing country around that state, also voted to remove these guys. And hopefully, and I have 8 children, they're all grown now. You can't have 8 children and not be an optimist. Hopefully, your book title will turn out to be wrong, but they're going to do everything they can to steal this election, to make sure you can't vote, and if you do vote, that your vote won't be counted.
That's the point. So those of us, if you're listening, this is Greg Palast, the author of The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, the bestseller, and other bestsellers, Billionaires and Ballot Bans, Our Madhouse. My next, hopefully, bestseller is How Trump Stole 2020. Now, I'm writing in advance. It's not a prediction. I don't have a crystal ball, David. But some people may say I have crystal balls here because they may break on this one. And the idea is that this is your last warning. And it's not about whether Trump should be elected or unelected. I'm not partisan on this. If he gets the votes, fine. We're talking about shoplifting this election through this trickery. We saw it in Milwaukee where they insisted on going ahead and literally, I think people, I've talked to experts who say people are going to die who had lined up to vote, and even especially the poll workers. They went from 180 polling stations in Milwaukee to 5. Milwaukee is the African-American majority city in Milwaukee, and yet, but like you say, they can't steal all the votes all the time, and people in Wisconsin all over the state, Democrats and Republicans, said we've had enough of this type of trickery, and they voted in progressives as judges in the state of Wisconsin, as they had thrown out Scott Walker and replaced him with Tony Evers and Mandela Barnes as lieutenant governor. You'll see in a short clip.
We got a very good indication this week of how far Trump is going to go in the election in the fall. Trump made this assertion repeatedly that the Constitution is full of provisions that only he can decide when the economy can be opened up. And the governors have to do what he says, and he has all power. And you may recall he's previously said, I have an Article 2 that lets me do anything as president. Because, of course, Donald has never read the Constitution. He has no idea what's in it. Not one of the mainstream reporters in the 2016 election asked him about this, and I called my former colleagues at the New York Times and the LA Times and friends at the Washington Post and elsewhere and said, just ask him what's in Article 2, and don't let him get with, it's awesome power. Make him specify, because he can't do it. And he's a madman. He wants to be Emperor Donald I. He wants Ivanka to be Empress Ivanka the First after he's gone. And to think otherwise is to just defy reality. A man who says that he's in total control and the governors are subordinate to him is somebody who didn't pay attention in junior high school civics when we learned about the federal system and how the states are co-equal to the federal government. And so people should be really, really worried. In the event, and I think this is unlikely, that he tries somehow to suspend an election. Just remember this. We held an election in 1864 during the Civil War. We can hold an election during the Civil War. There's no reason whatsoever. But we should open up voting. People should be able to vote on multiple days. They should be able to vote by mail-in ballot if they choose. And they shouldn't have to put postage on the letter. Congress should approve money for the postal costs. The Democrats should really hold up any further corporate bailout or aid money for corporations on that one issue.
Well, that's, you're talking about democracy and connecting it to the money, as they do, because they understand that the trick is if you can steal an election, you've stolen the keys to the Treasury, to our
Treasury. That's right. It's easier to make a fortune by stealing it from the Treasury or rewriting the government rule book than where you should make a fortune, which is in the competitive marketplace.
Yeah, making stuff. Speaking of making stuff, David Cay Johnston, who is the Pulitzer Prize winning founder of dcreport.org. Great place for real information that you can understand, but it's real investigative reporting. This is the good stuff. And, of course, at gregpalast.com, you can pick up my reports for Salon, Rolling Stone, and other outlets. But more important, that I want you to get David Cay Johnston's wonderful best-selling book. That's really quite important. It's just a great read, it's even worse than you think what the Trump administration is doing to America. And of course, I hope that you'll also pick up How Trump Stole 2020, which will be out on June 2nd. You can pre-order it now on Amazon. And David Cay Johnston, you were also concerned about the integrity of the vote coming up in November, and you're talking about Trump possibly pulling a fast one and canceling it. That there are issues. For example, because we do have an electoral college, and we saw in Florida, by the way, back in 2000. People don't remember something that was quite dangerous. The Florida state legislature, Republican-controlled, ordered their electors to vote for George Bush, no matter what the vote count. Now, we've kind of forgotten about that, and Al Gore grabbed his ankles, and that was over with. But that type of business where a partisan legislature can order their electors, and they'll say, "Oh, we had problems with the vote count. We had a virus. We couldn't count the votes." This is a dangerous new business. So democracy is a very precious thing, and it's not just a matter of whether who is in charge of the votes and who wins the count. But they win the money. Right now, it's life and death. And it's not whether I'm for or against Donald Trump getting reelected or Joe Biden or whatever the heck, or Bernie, who's ever going to be there. But it's a question of your right to vote. And if you read David Cay Johnston's book, you will know what's at stake. That's what we have to discuss. Homes were lost to the gangsters and the banksters that David Cay Johnston exposed. Now, Donald Trump was not a billionaire when he became president of the United States. He just plays one on TV. But he is right now, with his buddies stuffing their pockets. It would be very extraordinary if it weren't kind of shifting into his pocket in some way, but even more, it's shifting out of your pocket. And so I'd like you to talk about some of the things that, we just had this massive $2 trillion bailout bill. You get, like you say, you get 10 weeks, you got $1,200. Don't spend it in one place. Big spenders, and be grateful. But apparently, they're now talking about having the Federal Reserve also bail out private equity firms. Could you explain what that means and what's going to happen?
Yeah, private equity firms are largely unregulated pools of money that typically, at the end of the day, are in a real estate game, but they take over a company by borrowing a lot of money and putting up little or none of their own money. Then they go in and they fire workers. They find various ways to strip down the company. They take out a loan based on projections of future profits that pays them back all the money they put into it, which was very tiny to begin with, and a lot more. There are deals out there where for every dollar they put in for a few months, they got $6 back within a year. Eventually, the company can't pay back the debt in most cases, and they have to keep it going for a year and a day under a federal rule. But once the year and a day passes, if the company goes bankrupt, the insiders get to keep their ill-got gains. It's really a sophisticated form of theft. And the theft is in many forms. I mean, the people who loan money to the outfit are stolen from. The workers are stolen from. Not in the short run, their jobs and benefits, and then ultimately their entire jobs. And it is part of this culture that we have created since the beginning of Reagan that says it's okay to do these things, that we don't have to think about running businesses and enterprises for the welfare of the whole community because of this cockamamie claim by Milton Friedman that the sole purpose of a company is to make money for its shareholders, which is, by the way, totally not the law. It's not what the law says at all. If anybody wants to understand that, there's a very slim little readable book called The Myth of Shareholder Value by Lynn Stout, who was a pro-markets Republican a professor of law and business at UCLA and then Cornell, The Myth of Shareholder Value. But it is part of this whole apparatus that we've set up that mines the economy instead of building it. That takes, if you could just take a penny a day from everybody in America for a year, at the end of the year, you'd have almost $1.2 billion. Now, I've shown industries where they're stealing from every American 2 or 3 pennies a day. The pipeline industry forces you to pay rates that include taxes that they don't pay to the government. They keep it. And so here's my question. How many of you are going to sign up tomorrow? We're going to hold demonstrations. Stop the 3 penny a day ripoff. Well, of course, we're not going to do that. And that's the system, is you steal a little here and a little there. You push people out of their house whose hands aren't totally clean, but they're also not filthy dirty. And you make a lot of money. You're not building. You're not making something useful and productive for society. You're just manipulating the financial side of this because we have such weak laws protecting people.
And I just want to note, you had mentioned that this is your explanation of the private equity firms that are getting a special bailout under the cover that it's saving us from the economic damage of the virus. What we're doing is we're sending billions of dollars to these gamblers. And it's not just that they're gambling and we're covering their gambling losses, but their gambling losses result in closure of industries, loss of business, like Delphi, for example. I've investigated Paul Singer, the Vulture, known as the Vulture. You don't get the name the Vulture, David, by being a nice businessman, who literally took 35 plants and moved them to China. He was a never Trumper because he was, but now he's become a forever Trumper. He's got a $42 billion private equity hedge fund, a vulture fund, and this is the guy who is now backing Trump to the hilt. Again, so when you're voting for Trump, whether you're for or against his policies, I'm not saying who you should vote for, but understand that that on his shoulder is this vulture where $42 billion is not enough. You had mentioned about billionaires who are sleepless because they can't get their next billion. So, again, I'm here. I'm here.
One thing to think about here is that these guys are supposed to be sophisticated risk takers. They made bad bets. They were imprudent, and we're bailing them out. Ordinary Americans who didn't take risks, we're not really bailing out in the same way. And so what's going on here? It's corporate socialism. It's raw, unfettered capitalism in its meanest form for ordinary Americans. And the protective nature of protecting people from economic shocks for the very richest among us who should be able to cope with it. So let's take Mr. Paulson. If the value of his fortune falls by half, he's still a multi-billionaire. Why would we spend 1 penny bailing him out? He should be defending his own businesses. On the other hand, look at the lines that are showing up on TV of middle-class people going to food banks because they don't have any money. We've created this society where most people don't have savings. Their incomes are, for the bottom 90% of Americans, their incomes are hardly higher than they were 50 years ago. And at the same time, people at the very top have exploded. We live in a society now where, for example, Sheldon Adelson, the gambling mogul, and his wife each have a his and her jet, a Boeing 747.
Well, you wouldn't want to be in the same jet. Wait a minute. You wouldn't want to be stuck in the same jet with your own wife, would you?
I wouldn't want to with any of them. But I mean, one of the things that Trump and the radical Republicans did in the 2017 tax law is they increased subsidies to corporate and privately owned jets. I mean, really? This is the administration that we have. This is the people at the very top who are just sucking the life's blood, the economic vitality out of people down below. And it doesn't matter what your politics are. I mean, I'm a registered Republican. I'm a big champion of competitive markets. These aren't market economics. This isn't capitalism. This is just an oligarchy thieving off the rest of the society, and it's as bloodless and uncaring and dangerous as the coronavirus if it gets into your lungs. It's killing our country.
Well, talking about getting into your lungs and economics. I have a chapter in the book, How Trump Stole 2020, about, actually, you mentioned pipelines. As soon as Trump got in, he authorized the Keystone XL pipeline extension. Now, understand, why do we need tar sands, the filthiest oil in the world, from Canada, which goes down a pipeline all across our aquifers, down to Texas? Now, David Cay Johnston, I understand we have some oil already in Texas, but apparently the Texas oil can't be used by the refineries on the Gulf Coast, owned by, guess what, Koch Industries. The brothers Koch. Well, there's only one brother, one of the of David and Charles. Only Charles is left, so it's all his. And that bringing down that cheap oil from Canada, which, by the way, is now less than $10 a barrel, so they get to suck up this cheap oil, and literally that's worth $2 billion a year just from that one operation for the Koch family. In addition, there is Billy Koch, who you will meet in my book. He used to, by the way, rat on his brothers. I have him on tape because he was in a fight with his brothers, so he used to rat on them and tell me how they were committing a series of felonies and giving me all the details when I was working at The Guardian. But, when that Keystone Pipeline goes from the tar sands filth of Canada, that stuff is so gunky, so filthy, that it actually can't make it through the pipeline. It's like tar balls. So they have to pull out some of the tar, and that's done by Billy Koch's company, Oxbow Carbon. And so they take out this massive amount of filth. Yeah. And
I did an expose of Bill Koch last year that nobody picked up on, and we showed he was criminal investigation for not paying taxes on his income of over $100 million a year. He claimed that all the profits from his what's called petroleum coke business were earned by his Bahamas company, which consists of a little storefront in a Nassau, Bahamas shopping center.
Right.
And we had the email proving criminal investigation of him, and he lives one door away from Mar-a-Lago, by the way. And lo and behold, as soon as he took office, the IRS stopped investigating him. Now, I don't think that Trump called up and said, stop investigating him. I think what happened is the IRS was smart enough to say, we're not going after Donald Trump's neighbor.
And by the way, I should mention, as long as you're bringing up Billy Koch, by the way, there's 4 Kochs, and 4 brothers. 3 of them are still alive. So Billy Koch, the kind of unknown, somewhat unknown billionaire brother, while David and Charles were never Trumpers to begin with, Billy Koch was actually the first, the very first billionaire to put his money behind his next door neighbor, Donald Trump. And so when you talk about, so suddenly, then Trump gets elected as your great investigation. Look at DC report.org. That's dcreport.org. And also in my book, you'll get the story of Billy Koch and his filth pipe. And you got to put these two things together, David Cay Johnston. When they bring that filthy, filthy oil down from Canada, down to Texas of all places, and they remove the pet coke, the petroleum coke, which is this it's basically burnable gunk, and they pull that out of the pipeline, the pet coke. By the way, it's so filthy.
It's liquid coal.
It's liquid coal, and it's so filthy you actually, for the most part, are not allowed to burn it in the United States. So they send it to China, but it still goes in the atmosphere. But when it gets burned, you have to understand that destroys your lungs. So when the virus hits, you are now compromised. And I can tell you a person who's compromised by coal dust in their lungs. That's me. I grew up next to a coal plant in Los Angeles. Coal in Los Angeles, believe it or not, when I was a kid. And I couldn't breathe at 4 o'clock. I'm missing one lung because of that. I've never smoked in my life, by the way. And so I am high risk from the coronavirus because of the filth. And the filth that's going into the atmosphere that I had to breathe as a kid, people are breathing now because Billy Koch is not satisfied with the $7 billion he picked up from his family. That's not enough. He needs another billion, and if it means melting your lungs and making you more vulnerable to the coronavirus, to COVID-19, they don't care. So what's at stake here in this election is your lungs, your family, your money, and as long as they get $1 billion more, they don't care. What every billionaire wants is another billion.
There's some epidemiological research from the 1917-1920 flu.
Okay.
And it shows that those cities in America that had the heaviest reliance on coal-fired power plants for electricity had significantly higher deaths from the coronavirus. We've known this for a long time, and it is astonishing. I mean, it was an easy enough project to do. There were cities that had coal-fired power plants, and then there were those that didn't. They got their electricity from hydro, or power plants were downwind from the city, and it made a huge difference, just these minor little differences.
Thank you, David Cay Johnston, who is the Pulitzer Prize-winning extraordinary investigative reporter, author of the New York Times bestseller, It's even worse than you think, what the Trump administration is doing to America. And this is Greg Palast, the author of How Trump Stole 2020. No, I don't have a crystal ball, but you want to take a look at that book, and you can order it now. It'll be out June 2nd from Amazon, where you can pick up David Cay Johnston's book as well. This is Greg Palast. Go to gregpalast.com. Go to dcreport.org, and I will see you again, David. Let's do some work together because you're a fantastic investigative reporter. I'd be honored to do additional investigation with you. Thank you, and stay safe. We're both in our living rooms or wherever, and I know I've kept you from your dinner. So the best to you and your family. Stay safe.
Take care.
Thanks, David.